Hi, everyone. We're going to get started shortly here. We're just seeing quite a few people dialing in, and our two co-hosts are just getting ready. So we're going to give it another minute or so, and we'll get going on the presentation. I think this might be a record, Mary, for our biggest webinar to date. So it's exciting to bring together the grocery business audience with the Caddle audience and put on this presentation.
That's great.
Okay, so just while we're still waiting for a few more people, I'll give you guys a quick kind of intro into the session today. We've got quite a lot of content prepared, so we are going to spend the next hour or so going through it. My name's Camille. I work at Caddle as the marketing lead, and you'll hear my voice but not see my face today because I want you to see Mary and Ransom, who I will introduce in a second. But today we're going to be going over the last mile, and we've come together with Grocery Business on this presentation to look at how online shopping direct to doorstep is happening in the Canadian market today, especially with a lens on what's happening in grocery. So we're really excited to take you through the deck. As I mentioned, we've got a pretty full calendar, so we are going to try to leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. If you do have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit them through the GoToWebinar panel where there's a question box, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation or have someone follow up with you offline. If you have really specific questions about the data, I may not be able to answer them live on the call today, but certainly we can circle back with you. So without further ado, I am going to pass you over to Ransom, who's going to kind of take lead on sharing the insights today, and Mary to provide her perspective throughout the presentation.
Thank you, Camille. Okay, and a special call out that there will be a grocery business article dropping November 29th, and a lot of this data is covered as well as some additional stuff. So what you'll see is we are talking about the last mile within Canada with fresh data. It is not just specifically focused to grocery, but this deck does have tailored towards grocery. But it is online shopping in general across Canada, and we'll help define that for you in the coming slides. We'll talk about total landscape, winners and losers in terms of categories, things like apparel outside of just grocery, just online shopping in general, winners and losers and retailers in terms of who's taking up that share of wallet, the last mile direct to doorstep, and what that looks like today. It's a definition that's changed a little bit, especially throughout COVID, and then a bit of a future outlook as we look towards 2022 and beyond. Okay, so maybe Mary, I'll pass it over to you for an introduction, and then I'll take over and jump into the next two slides.
Yes, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Sienna, and I'm the editorial director of Grocery Business Magazine. It's a Canadian publication. We've been in business for over 13 years, and we're partnering with Caddle because this is an important topic. So that's it.
Thank you, Mary. And I can see the great looking magazine coming out, staying out right behind you. And so I'm Ransom. I'm the CEO of Caddle, and for those of you who don't know, the coming slides I'll bring you up to speed on what Caddle does. We are exclusively focused in Canada, and we're a data and insights platform, mobile first, and we operate a marketplace. And so it's a marketplace model in terms of we have our own first party panel, and we have the clients that we work with as well, and we reward our panel members for sharing their data and engaging with brands. My background is I worked in consumer packaged goods for about 7 years, and then left about 7 years ago to start Caddle. So we operate one of the largest, if not the largest, daily active panel when it comes to consumer data in Canada. Again, we focus exclusively within the Canadian market across the country. We've got about 10,000 daily active members, about 100,000 monthly active members. So a lot of rich sample to pull from, and some of which is where this data came from. We reward our members for, as I mentioned, engaging with brands and sharing their data in a number of different ways. So that can be through video, image stimuli, survey, which is exclusively how we derive the data for this webinar, There's also things like receipt and photo capture reviews and our ability to continually re-engage them in a longitudinal manner. So I'll try to keep it brief so we're not pitching everyone on the line here. So in terms of this study itself, we looked at a representative sample. Data is pulled from last month in partnership with Grocery Business. And it's a custom study that looked at 6,000 Canadians. We also looked at data from our daily survey, which is a survey that runs daily. And we have between 8,000 and 12,000, depending on the day, Canadians respond to that on a daily basis. So allows us to collect a lot of data very quickly. And we don't need to touch on the margin error, but because of the scale of margin error is quite low. All right, so let's jump in. Online shopping in Canada. As a reminder, this data is at a total level, and when it does specifically focus in grocery, which it does quite a bit in this deck, it will call that out. Excuse me. So what is the last mile, and or really should be the last kilometer? And it describes how the goods get to your home, and that has delivery direct to home, but that has changed a little bit, accelerated through COVID. So it covers things like a buy online, pick up in store, or a locker, or delivery to home as well. It's really just that last journey. And it covers not just within grocery, but you'll see a couple of, it's not exhaustive, but you'll see a couple items below. If you're ordering from Old Navy or Banana Republic or Uber Eats or Instacart or Costco, all of this stuff was covered at a macro level, and then we dive a little bit deeper into certain areas, and specifically in this webinar, grocery. Okay. So grounding ourselves in a few stats here, and I think what you'll find is there's a lot of interesting data, and there's great data in terms of where we're going post-pandemic and within 2022. And what you'll find, I think, is none of it is really surprising, but there is some very interesting key takeaways that we'll get through. About 1 in 3 say online shopping in general will become a bigger part of their routine for grocery. So that's a massive number. And if any of you were part of our Instacart webinar, there is certainly, that is a key takeaway, that you are participating, if not at a native level, at one of the aggregator platforms like Uber Eats or Instacart. 7 in 10 Canadians shop online, and that's in general, not a specific grocery stat. So whether you're ordering a sweater, an ornament, or a bagel, or even McDonald's or something, that's included in shopping online. So and that does, of course, heavily skew younger. And we look at what's going to happen to this trend in the next 12 months. And again, this data was collected in October. The net increase, so top 2 box, is plus 16.7%. So that's top 2 box minus the bottom 2 box. And we have actually later in the deck that graph as well. But net, there's going to be a fairly substantial increase. So it's not just a COVID trend. It's something that accelerated people and perhaps pushed them out of their comfort zone to order things online, but it is certainly going to be sticky moving forward. All right, now we'll take a look at the categories. And I think this is an example of where perhaps it's not overly surprising. And then we've got the next couple of slides kind of break out the differences. The total chart, it's a bit of an eyesore, but it'll just give you a depiction of all the things we asked about, as well as some variances by gender and generation. So apparel, top 5 is number 1, beauty and grooming, and you'll see these do shake out a little bit when you look at gender and generation. Wellness, electronics, and household products make up the top 5. Bottom 5, which is also a function of seasonality and household penetration, things like baby care. Not everyone needs baby care products or items like that, or major appliances, for example. But that's how it shakes out from a top 5 and bottom 5 level. The next slide, as I said, is a lot to take in, and this deck will be made available to you. But it does highlight the areas which we asked about, which is not fully exhaustive, but it does make up the majority of these areas. And then the blue little dots are areas that would be applicable to grocery. So you'll see there is a substantial amount of areas, and again, with a grocery lens, this is why we've got such a high number of items here. Now, we don't, in this webinar, we don't drill into any of these areas, but of course, if there are any questions, we can certainly filter on that data and share some insights with you. So what you don't see, which is why that slide is interesting, is you don't see a good chunk of the areas in between the top 5 and bottom 5 that a lot of the grocery items make up. Okay, so this slide is, let me see, the one I have is highlighted, but what it is, it's the top 5 down the left-hand side, and then the breakout by gender and the breakout by generation. And you'll see there are some variances, which we can actually jump to the next slide because it highlights what those major variances are. But you'll see, all in all, the top 3 is fairly consistent, apparel being number 1, and then there are some variances, and one call out on the next slide that you'll see is pet care creeps up for our younger generation, Gen Z.
Yeah, just to add to that, because I removed the highlighting, sorry, voice behind the presentation here. But I think what's interesting about the top 5, both in the split out between female and male and as well by generation, is that there are a lot of variances. So I think often clients come to us wanting to reach a specific target market. And I think what's imperative is understanding how often, where, and what people are buying based on your target demo, and how you can reach them. So even if you look at like household cleaners, yes, they all kind of hit number 5 in terms of one of the top online categories, but the rate at which they're being purchased by each generation or demographic does really vary. So you can't really kind of treat your target carte blanche when you're thinking about the marketing tactics and strategies to engage them, and even the product selection as well. I think as we drilled further into this data and asked about very specific categories, like there's a lot of variance in how people prefer to shop and why, whether it's convenience, speed, price, etc. But on to the next slide, Ransom. Here's some highlights for you.
Yes, and the top 3 across the top horizontally are kind of the gender variances that we pulled out, and the bottom are the generational. So about 2 times as many men spend on electronics and IT products compared to women. And that tends to be a more male-dominated purchase, so not surprising there. 16% of women spend on home decor versus 12% of men. And then overall, women purchase more in every product category in general, with the exception of small appliances, electronics, home improvement, batteries, and intimate products. Way to go, gentlemen. In terms of generation, 17% of Gen Z are big spenders, and that's the one call out I mentioned on the previous slide on furry friends. So one thing to note, though, is that while it is the top 5, there's still, it was a select all that applies. So you'll notice that while it makes up the top 5, if you look at some of the other generation or gender breakdowns, the top 5 might have a higher percentage associated with it. So 70% is a big number for Gen Z, which brings it up to, I think they're number 4, number 5. Well, it doesn't make it into the top 5 for some of the other areas and generations, it still is 14%. So from a pet perspective, this was one that jumped out from the pet clients that we work with. It is a substantial number. I mean, 14% in Gen Z, approaching 1 in 5. Certainly an area to focus, especially in some of the areas that are less about bedazzling your furry friends and more about recurring purchases like food and treats. 18% of Canadians purchase household products online, compared to just 12% of Gen Z. And some of this is likely a function, when we compare to Gen Z, is likely a function of their role in the household as a primary grocery shopper or just a primary shopper. So supporting their furry friends or household products may default to someone else within their household, which ties into the last point as well, being less of a grocery product online. But that is that will soon be changing. So with a short-term lens of 2022, 2023, sure, And I know there's been a lot of content covering Gen Z and that buying power. So there's certainly, we cover it later in the deck, it's an area to focus, absolutely. And how do you grab the attention of these Gen Zers as they move into these roles of being primary spenders and drive that loyalty and first mover advantage. Alrighty. And Mary, we'll have a couple questions for you coming up, and feel free to jump in if you have anything. The next 3 slides, and I mean, Canadians are very value conscious, and for anyone who's spent any time in the industry over the past couple decades, will know that this is not new news. Items percent bought on deal, the traction that items on flyer, promotion, coupons can drive within Canada, it is fairly substantial. And while we saw a step back at the beginning of COVID, where conventional grocery stores actually won share against discount, that really has kind of returned to normal, with discount continuing to grow and win share again. As Canadians, and we won't get into that webinar, but as Canadians, we're looking for a one-stop shop and prioritizing convenience and cleanliness, which is why they went to some of those more conventional stores. That is, I think it's going to be a rapidly increasing, accelerating pendulum coming back the other way, with all of the factors that we have with the rate of inflation, and we'll cover that. And I know Mary has some thoughts on that as well. That discount will continue to win, and price will continue to be a factor for Canadians, and a growing factor. So we've got price, we've got free delivery, all kind of value and price focused, as well as promotion driven. So when we talk about what do they care about when shopping online, not just specifically for groceries, but just in general, price is critically important, free delivery and promotional items. So this is something that you need to be aware of as you evaluate what you're currently offering your client base online. If you do have a delivery platform, if you're evaluating a delivery platform, either native or something like an Instacart or DoorDash or something else. I also noticed that there are some changes happening on Instacart. I've now got ads that I see in terms of items that are promoted within my feed, and deals, and the number of Canadians that filter on a platform like Instacart by items that are on sale is a very frequent way that Canadians shop on that platform. And we've done another webinar on Instacart. If you missed that, we're happy to share that deck with you as well. But this does tie into all that need to be top of mind when you are evaluating that this needs to be an integral part of your strategy, is ensuring that you're competitive on price and value. So that really ties up to young and thrifty and the Canadians in general. I prefer value conscious. If I think about myself and raising a family of 5. So millennials and Gen Z tend to be even more cost conscious, and you think about dependents and mortgages and line of credits and debt from from education. So not very surprising, but it is a very substantial number. 45% of millennials and Gen Z consider price, which is slight over-index to general population. And then 15% of millennials consider promotional offers when choosing where to shop online. Okay. All right, here's my highlighted slide. It's beautiful. Agree to disagree, Camille. And so what this does is it takes the top 3. So you'll see that in each of the verticals, the top 3 are highlighted here. So there is some variance when you look at across gender in terms of what puts you off when it comes to online shopping. And so these are people who shop online, but we've asked them, essentially what can be improved or what they don't like. Later in the deck, we cover of those that say they don't shop online. So 7 out of 10 do, but 3 out of 10 we ask them why not. So we'll have some answers there, but this is specific for people who shop online, what could be improved they don't like. And this is, it's barriers that are not overly surprising. I think barriers that can be significantly improve within the next 12 months, 24 months for sure. So lack of ability to review products, preview products in person before purchase. Shipping costs are too high, which in the short term, I think that will continue to be a factor, but there's some very interesting technology advancements in drones and things like that that driverless cars that will be able to bring that down and reduce that as a barrier, and then enjoy the experience of going to the shop. So that's an item number 3. And if you look across, it is a fairly significant factor, even if not top 3, but especially in the older generations, that people just like going to the store. And if you look at things like we have an NPS customer experience tracker, you know, it does vary by banner and things like Giant Tiger and Costco, where there's a treasure hunt element and a very high net promoter score for those retail banners. Those things tend to draw people in store and drive that excitement. And that one is difficult to replicate, especially even if you look at things like the metaverse or where virtual reality is going. One important note, and I know this is a little bit covered on the next slide, in the next 2 slides, I think, and there's a grocery slant as well coming. But if you look at those barriers when you look at the younger generations, so on the right-hand side, millennial and Gen Z, and what the top 3 are. We think about delivery taking too long, and I know you've got some thoughts on that, Mary, in terms of why that perception is there and kind of who drove that. Difficulty of returning and shipping costs are too high. Again, less about touching and feeling and experiencing, and same with Gen Z. And I think there's some advancements there, as I mentioned before, that will, when you think about the buying power moving from Gen Z and forward millennial, that younger, those 2 younger generations, those are the ones that we need to focus on in grocery and overall shopping online, as they'll make up the lion's share of the wallet. Okay, so this slide is looking at just from the last slide that we saw women in general have higher standards overall. So you know, what is putting them off? What they don't like about shopping online, and not a personalized experience. 30% versus 21% of men, higher shipping costs, 33% versus 26%. The next slide looks at if we filter specifically within grocery. That's your cue, Camille.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
I don't like driving in general.
It's okay. I was lost without you there. I was like a deer in headlights. So the number, the yellow number is what the number is, and then the number in the top right-hand corner is the variance from kind of total. So last one was overall shopping and what people, men and women, didn't like. And then this one is the results when filtered by grocery and how that changes. So more or less the same when it comes to women and not enjoying a personalized shopping experience, shopping overall, and grocery. Men saw an increase when they were looking specifically within grocery from 21 to 26%, so fairly substantial. Same with high shipping costs. So if you look at
question just to put out there, would it change, would these numbers change if you were looking at demographics versus just men and women? Do you think those numbers would change if you were comparing the demographics of men and women?
Yes, for sure.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so these are aggregated across, so generational trends within men and within women. Yeah, definitely. So that might be something that we can take as a takeaway. I think overall.
Yeah, sorry, what we were seeing at the start of the pandemic is that not a lot of people liked doing grocery shopping specifically online, but I think with sort of force and closures that more people adopted it, and it does seem through predictions that that's going to continue. But it was kind of, it varied by gender and generation in terms of like, you know, speed of checkout and store layout and convenience seemed to be a priority for millennial males, whereas like actually touching and feeling produce was more important for women. So it really does vary, and I think depending on what they're buying and who's buying it, definitely have different preferences. So I found what we're seeing a lot of the grocery stores do, and Mary, you probably could shed some light on this, is try to appeal to all shoppers, you know, offering curbside pickup, online delivery, you know, obviously having a good self checkout and a fast self checkout. That's why companies like Shoppers Drug Mart were number one, rated number one on our Net Promoter Score tracker for grocery, because you could get in and out of there fast and get all the essentials.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So you'll see some of these deterrents when you look at grocery, and you know, part of that is the nature of shopping within grocery, as you mentioned, Camille, and part of it is the infancy of this. It was massively accelerated through COVID, where you know, you've got staples that have been doing it for a while, like brands and apparel and Amazon, which really have it sorted out. And there was a lot of clunkiness at the beginning of the pandemic. And even as, so I'm an avid user of grocery apps, there's almost a week over week improvements that are being made. So there's a lot of traction, a lot of improvements being made, which is why, you know, even when we ask consumers what they're going to do from a, you know, a siloed look at what's happening now in terms of the landscape and the customer experience of these platforms, and that's still increasing, you layer in improvements to the platforms themselves, and that's, I think that number is going to be conservative.
Yeah,
So,
sorry, go ahead.
yeah, we have a question for you, Mary. Do you think the trend in online grocery shopping will continue post-pandemic?
I think it will continue. I think I'm sure that it will probably level out to a certain extent. And I think people, those that can sort of check off the boxes for price, for delivery, for service, for quality and experience, that's an important thing, I think, in online. I think that there, as you mentioned, there's a lot of room still for the grocery space to improve that experience. You had a stat there that talked about how there's still a certain segment that likes the in-store experience. Are there opportunities to emulate an in-store experience online? For example, impulse shopping, point of sale. There's just something you could do digitally to help advance that, because I think that there are opportunities to make that experience better for people. But certainly, you know, someone who checks off all those boxes are going to win in this. But it's also an emerging, it's a very competitive landscape, and there's more and more players emerging. We've had restaurants that have gotten into the grocery delivery business. You have Uber, you have DoorDash, you know, Uber partnering with the 7-Eleven and partnering with Metro. So there's a real mixed bag, and so it will be interesting to see what happens. But I think ultimately, online's here to stay, but companies are going to need a differentiator, because I don't think the loyalty is going to be there. I think the fact that people are price conscious, you know, they don't want to spend a lot of money. So to me, that means that they're not going to be loyal to a certain delivery service. They're going to go with which has the best price, which has the best product. So it's going to fragment the market. I think the market's going to be fragmented a little bit as we move forward. It's going to get better, but it's going to get more fragmented. And as you've mentioned in the past, there's going to be winners and losers. You have to differentiate yourself and provide someone with something that they'll want to use and come back to.
Yeah, totally agree. And those improvements that are coming and the platforms that are continue to flood and fragment, as you mentioned, the market, you know, and the, as you'll see in some of the coming slides, the household penetration something like an Uber Eats has compared to an Instacart, you know, that will continue to accelerate. So I mean, the status quo is just going to accelerate faster. And then on top of that, you look at the I'm not sure the right word here, but the just insane amounts of money that are being dumped onto these e-com, digital, and grocery. I think Instacart, I think about a year ago, was valued at $39 billion, one of the world's most valuable startups. And their focus is acquisition. So, you know, in terms of Canadians being price conscious and focused on promotion, there's going to be a lot of money spent on bringing these people online and giving them discounts in 2022. So it's going to be driving that number up substantially. So you layer in what you had said, and you layer in other players coming in, and value and all these billions being dumped in to say, go and acquire more members and increase penetration. You know, what will come out of that and who will be the winners and losers is difficult to say, but yes, I completely agree that it's an area we need to focus on.
Well, and people are going to have tighter budgets too. I mean, with inflation and rising prices at grocery, people are going to be thinking more carefully about how they spend their money. Certainly there's, obvious staples that they need to buy, but in terms of online delivery, as I said, they're going to look at where they could get the biggest bang for their buck, particularly the Gen Z, the emerging, this Gen Z, forgive me, I'm Canadian, but particularly the Gen Z, because they are price conscious. And I don't think that there'll be loyalty there. I think that they're just going to go where they could get the best bang for their buck.
Yeah. And that ties nicely into the next question, actually, which I think you responded to a little bit, which price being the number one factor, inflation on the rise, how will this continue to disrupt grocery?
And as I said, with the tight budget, first of all, it will continue to disrupt grocery. And I think that's the obvious answer, just tighter budgets. People are going to be careful about where they're spending their money. What it means in terms of the emerging competitors, will there be a shakeout? I don't know. Will there be some kind of acquisition in the market? I'm not really sure. I think if I step back a little bit and we have the big players in the market, but we also have the independents that probably want to get into this market because it's not going away. And I think what will happen is that some of the smaller independents who have already started in the online business will probably want to partner with other players because this, online's going to continue, as I said, and the biggest disruption to grocery is that it's the cost, right? People are going to have differentiators.
Yeah, and we and as a regional player, they have a lot of that on Instacart as well. So there is an ability to get in the game, and there's, I mean, that's a whole other story. But there's still room if you aren't a national player. There's still the ability to get in and make sure that you are participating in this, because this is going to be and will continue to be a game changer. We collected data. It came in last night. We partner with quite a few things with the agri-food department at, as you know, at Dalhousie, and it was focused on inflation in the new year. And the average Canadian family of 4 in 2022 is expected to spend close to $1,000 more on their grocery bill next year. And we asked Canadians what they thought of that, and they thought it was actually going to be, so top 2 box was close to 60%, I believe, thought it was going to be more than that. And in terms of how they saw that inflation outpacing their income, 90% said that inflation was outpacing their household income. That's crazy. So, and that kind of filters into, and I know Camille is keeping us on task here, but have that report. So, and this is not, you don't have to pay extra for it. Just came in last night, which is why it's not included here. And it was a separate study, but happy to share that as well. So 63% of Canadians, this was a 10,000 person sample, Canadian representative, intended to change their food shopping habits in 2022. Crazy. And I know there's a savers.
Ransom, I think most people said that they planned on spending more on both fresh and frozen, but it's going to be interesting to see when, food inflation and which product categories that hits the hardest, how that will change over the next 6 months.
Yeah, and what it means to shifting where they spend, in terms of changing your food shopping habits and what they eat, and eating more veggies and eating out less and using, I mean, it's a very interesting report, but it all supportive and really enforces the areas of price and promotion is going to be critical in that inflation piece, and how sensitive Canadians are. And $1,000 for a family of 4 on an annual basis just for groceries is a lot of money.
It's going to drive more people to the discount banners, and if they don't have online presence, then that may even happen to create a shift as well in online. Maybe people will say, well, because I could save X amount of money, is it worth going to this store in person rather than doing online if they can't offer the right pricing?
Yes. Yep. Okay, and now we'll talk about the winners and losers, or at least a ranking of the retailers shopped online at a total online level. We've got Amazon #1 across the board, followed by Costco, which is almost number 2 across the board, and then apparel. But as you go down that list, there's still, you still have Walmart, which of course is more than grocery, but makes up a substantial amount across the generations, but the top 3 remain relatively constant. And then if you look down at the bottom, we've got traditional grocery and discount grocery. And that is a more of a function of the availability of this. I think it's not going to be an Amazon or a Costco yet, but being able to shop at a traditional, conventional, or discount grocery store isn't very easy right now within Canada. So that's not a giant area for online spending, but it is certainly going to accelerate.
But this is a broad look though, right? This is, we're not talking about just grocery right now, but online shopping in general.
In the past 6 months where they've shopped.
So to me, yeah, it makes a lot of sense that, you know, the Amazon and the Costco and Walmarts would do well because they have both grocery and non-grocery items in their offerings. So it's a good mix for them.
And I think as we think about price, and Amazon often being a price, you know, leader or lowest price, there might become an even bigger divide between the top 3 and the rest in terms of where people are choosing to shop, which is challenging.
Yeah, and there's a lot. It's quite a competitive landscape between, in what I've seen, between Amazon and Walmart in particular, and maybe not so much here in Canada, but in the US, they've really ramped up on the last mile delivery. I mean, they just recently had an announcement that they're testing drones where they're in Wisconsin, and so they're really ramping up their game in that last mile delivery and trying to up their speed. So it seems to be a real battle going on between Amazon and Walmart. Of course, it's not, but it's not just groceries, but groceries would be part of that.
Especially when fresh comes, which I don't know. We did a whole study on Amazon in Q1 of this year, and I know fresh wasn't out yet, but that will make a big impact on where people are choosing to shop for groceries online as soon as Amazon has broadened their product selection as well.
Yeah.
But some highlights Ransom's going to walk you through on that chart.
We talked about the first one on the top left. And overall, women shopping more than men online at a total level, with the exception of a couple of retailers and improvement electronics. 2 times as many millennials and Gen Z spend on their appearance than older generations, which appearance we take into account apparel and beauty, those 2 sections. And then Gen Z departs from traditional grocery stores, spending close to about half of what the other generations spend. So ties into young and thrifty, as well as access. And so if you think about what platforms are available that are available, easily accessible to Gen Z, but they certainly are spending more within traditional discount than the other generations. Okay, so we've got a question for you again, Mary. What can traditional grocery do to appeal to Gen Z and even as well as they become a more dominant buying power? So grocery, and then in general, how do we win the wallets?
Well, I think for one thing, the Gen Z group, they're not just price conscious, they're also more eco-conscious. And so that may play a role in the decisions that they make in the grocery delivery service they use. For instance, do they want to have a service that has electric vehicles? Do they want a service that pays its drivers fairly? Do they want a platform that offers lots of sustainably sourced products? I think those are all going to be factors that play in, combined with pricing. But I think it's a factor that people need to consider to appeal to the Gen Z generation. It's obvious. I mean, if you look at people like, you see what's going on with the recent summit that they had on the environment, it's a really important issue. So sustainable products, what's the carbon footprint that my grocery delivery service is providing? Those may be questions or factors that come into play when they make their decisions. So it's something that I think delivery services need to consider.
Yes. Yes, and you've got this young and thrifty, value conscious, and the Gen Z being quite vocal around the things that you'd mentioned, being eco-friendly, green, organic, fair and equitable. And it's a delicate balance, right? I mean, they say they want this, and like every generation, there's a say versus do, and talking out of both sides of their mouth, right? And local and things like that, but they're not really willing to pay more for it. And they say they want these things, and you have things like 94% of crypto is being purchased by millennials and Gen Z, which uses more energy than Apple, Google, Microsoft, and IBM combined. Those of stuff happening that there's this bit of a divide of what they're saying and doing. Yeah. So as just a word of caution, and that messaging is critical and delivering on that messaging. But when push comes to shove, it appears that Gen Z is really looking out for number one. So certainly understanding that shopper, and we've got a large representation on the Caddle platform, which can help do that as well. Who's the environmentalist young girl was like person of the year?
Greta Thunberg.
Greta, yes. So I saw something that said, Greta's Instagram followers globally is 13 million, and which is huge. And then you got Kylie Jenner, which is 290 million. Right, which I think speaks to.
It's a little bit of a dichotomy there, but
talk about the Kardashians.
Yeah.
Right, we got to weave in the Kardashians into this presentation somehow, right? And fast fashion and things. So in terms of influences on the generation, that's a small example, but okay. So thank you for that, Mary.
One last thing I wanted to mention too, the whole idea of instant gratification. Again, it's a bit of a dichotomy, as you mentioned. They say that they want one thing, but they're not willing to pay the price. But the instant gratification is an element. I know we're probably going to address that at another point, where they want things now. They want it now, and that's just an expectation. It's the world that they've lived in, because they live in the digital world where information is instantaneous. So they kind of expect, when they buy products, that's going to happen as well. So it's just an interesting element of how do you address these sort of opposing values that this particular demographic has. So I don't have the answer, but
yeah.
We've got quite a few slides left, so I'm going to speed you guys through this.
Right. So next one, Camille's always the best at this. Next ones are pretty quick hits. In terms of the last mile and direct to doorstep, in terms of how people are getting it, vast majority is delivered direct to home. And then on the next slide, whether it's delivered to a locker or BOPIS, buy online, pick up in stores, is a much smaller a percentage of the populations. Okay, so let's keep moving. And then we've got questions, and then we're almost done. Camille, she even just sent me a text, and we got to pick this.
Drill sergeant.
And you're still talking so slow.
Okay. All right. Need for speed.
Okay.
So basically, there's still people that aren't shopping online to get many things, and they're shopping online but picking up in store or curbside pickup. But this number is really low compared to start of pandemic, when a lot of people were doing curbside pickup.
Yeah. And these are five stats where kind of speed and what consumers are expecting in terms of this space. So 44% of Canadians want to be able to purchase things, everything needed delivered to the door, which is, delivered to your door. There is an environmental sustainability cost to that, and all these boxes that are being delivered direct to home. 65% of Canadians get their deliveries within 2 days. Which we are spoiled, and even in the US, they're even more spoiled, with some being able to get 2-hour delivery. 56% of Canadians want the availability of choosing their speed and their options. And then the last couple stats are touching on indexing, men over-indexing when it comes to wanting everything versus women, nearly half, 48%, and then just over half of Gen Z compared to baby boomers, which is not surprising. wanting to be able to get everything delivered to them versus leave their box in the sky. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary, how has Amazon affected Canadians' perception of speed?
Well, I think it's raised the bar and people's expectation. I mean, as we know, Amazon, you buy from Amazon and you could literally get something within hours if you happen to be close to a distribution warehouse of Amazon. And I think that really, as I said, it's raised the bar for people. And now there's expectations about getting products, within 3 to 4 hours. In the US, I've seen a lot more of that, but that's going to continue happening. People are going to want that from their groceries. And it's going to be a challenge for some of the players in the market. And of course, Amazon can do that because they've got, they've got this huge logistical infrastructure that allows them to do that. As I said, with the warehouses, grocery stores, not all of them have that. And their distribution centers may be on one end of the city. So I don't know how that's going to play out, but as I said, I think it's raising the bar on speed and delivery. And it's going to be a challenge, I think, for a lot of the grocery retailers, because you can't really compete. It's very difficult to compete with an Amazon. But again, that's where partnerships may be able to come in. Whether if you're a smaller player, a mid-sized player, maybe there's partners, whether it's Uber, or DoorDash, Instacart, that can help some of these grocery stores deliver. So
it's a perfect segue to the landscape of delivery that we're going to just touch on in the next few slides.
Great segue. All right. So as we look at the providers within, call it grocery, but not exclusively grocery, and delivering to home, there is a huge amount of fragmentation. And you look at a platform like Instacart, which is known more or less for groceries, but you can get convenience. You can get apparel like H&M, Sephora is on Instacart, Mastermind and Indigo, which is I think Indigo is the number 2 retailer used on that platform, and even Staples. So you're going to continue to see this chart fill up with check marks as speed is important, price is important. But it's as you had mentioned earlier, Mary, it's going to continue to fragment, but also provide options for Canadians, which means more adoption, as well as options for retailers, large and small, to participate and test this without having to invest massively in a native platform.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Overall, about 3 in 10 Canadians have used a delivery app in the past 6 months. And those delivery apps, which you'll see on the next slide, and this is how it breaks out. Not surprisingly, you've got heavier usage by millennials and Gen Z, the younger generation, and the lowest within the older generation at about 15.6%. So sub in the below food delivery service, do you use Uber Eats, Skip the Dishes, DoorDash, Instacart, other? That number of 59% use Uber Eats. So that is convenient, it's interesting, and they've also spent a colossal amount of money getting people on the platform. I mean, I know myself, I get like 75% discount almost every other week just to use the platform, which is not sustainable, but it's driving that usage. So a platform like that expanding into other areas, which it has in a small way so far testing, but in the US, DoorDash, for example, is doing much more grocery. There's a much higher penetration. So if you've got 60% of Canadians saying that they've used this platform, that adoption of grocery makes a lot of sense, and that's going to continue to drive that penetration. And you'll see below it's compared to grocery delivery services, so quite a substantial increase, which poses competition to platforms like Instacart, as these platforms already have their app downloaded on a large number of Canadians' phones.
It's interesting to see Walmart and PC at sort of the equal percentage in usage, and I'm wondering whether that's changed from previous years. To me, there's a bit of a demographic change too. Certain people that shop at Walmart may not be the same people who would shop for, via PC Express, but it's interesting to see that they're at the same level.
Yes, a lot of spending and a lot of options too, right? Click and collect, locker, delivery, delivery to home, well, at least Walmart, delivery to home. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so a question for you, Mary. We've got 10 minutes left, so we don't have that many more slides, but we'll certainly have time for questions. Any delivery predictions for the next 6 months?
Well, I think we sort of touched on this earlier, that I think it's going to continue, that there'll be, but I think it's going to level out. And a lot of it's going to depend on what happens with the pandemic. You know, if we enter another wave, maybe we get a surge and people going online, but combine that with supply chain disruptions. Once again, I mean, things like what's happened in BC, you know, people continue to have supply chain disruptions in store. Will that also impact online? People will get frustrated because they won't be able to buy the products that they want. So I think it's going to continue, but how much it grows will depend on what happens, I think, with the environment, you know, with the supply chain disruptions, with the pandemic. So that's my answer. It's kind of vague, but that's what I think will happen.
Yeah, agreed. And you touched on a number of points earlier, which I agree with as well. So the next section covers that I mentioned earlier. It's the 3 out of 10 that don't currently shop online and why. And it's just a couple of slides to take a look at that. So you've got 7 out of 10 that are shopping online, and the immense amount of funding and the indication that they're going to continue to spend more on the online channel. And then you've got this section of 3 people that don't currently spend online. And a portion of that is certainly going to convert, especially when you look at can't preview products prior to purchase. Platforms are getting more creative in ways of doing that. Higher shipping costs, which in the short term looks like it will continue to be short, but there will certainly be a lot of promotional dollars dumped in. Shopping and as an in-store experience, which is in favor to the older generation, is a difficult one to tackle. So not one that I'm sure these platforms will tackle in the near term. Difficulty of returning, there are some platforms that make it very difficult and some that make it way too easy. It'll be interesting to track that, as there has been a lot of fraud on platforms like Instacart that just give you the money if you say you didn't get the product or you don't like it. And then not a personalized shopping experience. So as the platforms themselves improve and get better at recommending and improving their algorithms, that's another area which will continue to convert that 3 out of 10 to shop online.
Mm-hmm.
Like specifically a grocery on the next slide, you'll see some of the variances there. Outside of can't preview products prior to purchase, which drops, which makes sense. I mean, typically you know what you're buying and you know what you're getting.
Mm-hmm.
The other areas are a little bit higher in terms of a reason why they don't shop for groceries online. Higher shipping costs, for an in-store experience, difficult to return, and not personalized. So more hurdles in general, people being more sensitive to these areas when you look at grocery. Mm-hmm. All right, we've got 2 more slides. And this was the area that we touched on a couple of times. You saw the stat up at the beginning of the deck in terms of the expect to shop more online, same or less in the next 6 months. And this data was collected in October. It's very fresh data. Overall, you've got 26, close to 27% saying that they'll spend more. And then you've got about 10% saying they'll spend less. So the net change is 16.7. And we talked about that number likely being conservative, especially with this COVID dragging on improvements to platforms as well. Mm-hmm. So key takeaways very quickly before I get another text from Camille. Canadians are value conscious.
Sorry.
And price, speed, and free delivery and direct to door. I mean, that's critically important to them. Online spending is going to continue to increase, and we think that number, as mentioned, is conservative, 16.7 net. Top categories are apparel, beauty, grooming, and health and wellness. But there's certainly going to be accelerated growth of that wallet within traditional and conventional grocery as those platforms become more available and accessible through delivery. We talked about winning retailers, and I mean, top 3 across the board, essentially being Amazon, Costco, and apparel retailers. And then in terms of where we focus, driving conversion with people that don't currently shop, focusing with the people that are currently shopping, and also focusing within Millennial and Gen Z, and ensuring that you have the right messaging, but price and promotion, especially as we enter 2022, and how sensitive Canadians are going to be with their finances, having price and promotion and value at the top. And if you're looking at platforms like Instacart, the ability to filter of in-store prices versus having a markup is another area where consumers tend to focus. So with that, we will open the floor up. I know, Camille, if there's a few questions that we can touch on and run through.
Yeah, if you haven't submitted your questions yet, please do so. We will be providing a copy of the deck presentation following the event. You'll get an email from us. If you have any questions about the data specifically, feel free to reach out. When there's a few questions here, I'm just scrolling through them 1 second. One question is if we are able to provide data breakdowns at a provincial level. So Ransom, do you want to touch on that one while I read through the rest?
Yes. So we will be able to provide that. We have a dashboard report with this data, and it's Excel based, and you can click on the generations and you can click on provinces, and we can also layer in filters like ethnicity, occupation, education, household income, things like that. So when we do share this through Camille, if there hasn't been a dashboard created, then we can create one and make it available. So it's easy to manipulate the data. Yes, for easy. And from our panel members, we get as granular as postal code.
Yeah, the second question is there any sort of general statement that you could make in regards to product types that consumers are more or less comfortable to purchase online, and why? Is there a specific theme from your perspective? Hard one.
Yeah, I would say things that are more routine and less customized, right? So if you think about things like pet food, and I think about the 25 different things that I subscribe to on Amazon Subscribe and Save, where I don't have to worry about returning if the product isn't exactly what I thought it was going to be or doesn't fit. So I know that's broad and quite intuitive, but it's those areas where, and you think it's actually quite surprising if you look on some of the platforms, how little information there is on those platforms. Like even some items on Instacart that don't even have a picture. So making sure, so how you can kind of close that gap, especially if it's a lower household penetration product, making sure that there's enough description images where consumers can get comfortable with what they're going to receive. And then if you have a product that maybe is a little more custom, or a new or niche product that you're looking to drive trial, making sure that the description is there as well as returns are fairly seamless. And within something like Instacart, it's quite seamless to return. And then other platforms, if you're not specifically in grocery, ensuring that return policy is front and center, so it removes some of that risk. And then of course, ratings and reviews are critical, which, we support that as well, to drive that confidence that what they're purchasing is a solid product.
Mm-hmm. There's some specific questions about which categories and specific retailers were included in the data, but I'm going to make those an offline follow-up, just because to open up the reports and dig in through a bunch of stuff right now is not that helpful. One last question, and I believe I got this right. Maybe I just don't know the acronym, but the question was, what impact do you believe retailers investing in MFCs will have in online grocery trends? I don't know what an MFC is, but
is it FMCG? Fast-moving
consumer? No, I was thinking maybe NFC, near field communication, but I'm not quite sure if that's the case. So we can skip over that one, and we'll follow up. Oh, micro fulfillment centers. Adam has just clarified for me.
Oh.
Yeah, so I guess like having more warehouses in more places. I suppose that'll help with speed, which I don't know if you touched on that in the presentation, Ransom, but one of the interesting things that we learned about speed through this presentation, right in that sort of speed slide, was just that speed isn't necessarily one of the top reasons that people buy. It's price, but speed is a minimum expectation. And with Amazon, doing same day, 1 day delivery, every retailer's expectation for speed is that it's going to get there fast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you think about stores with with 300 Walmart stores across the country, 1,100 home hardware stores across the country. Those acting as potential mini fulfillments, or at least if it's not feasible to be a fulfillment center, having an availability on a platform where someone comes in and shops and can get that shop filled very quickly.
Great. Okay, well, we do have some other questions that we will follow up on offline in regards to data, some category specific questions. And certainly if you think of anything else, feel free to send us an email. I'm happy to answer it. And we will be sharing the recording as well as the deck following the presentation. So that's that. Thanks everyone for joining. And thanks again to Mary and Grocery Business for joining us on this event.
Oh, thanks for inviting us. It's been great. Bye, everyone.